Hello, everyone. Welcome to this GGS webinar. My name's Louis. I'm the marketing executive here at GGS. I'm really excited for today's topic, which is mines, gas, hazard, and managing piling and drilling and grouting risks. It's going to be led by Simon, who I'll introduce shortly. But do feel free, as always, to ask some questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom. We'll answer some of those at the end of today. Also, our downloading of today will be recording today, so you can download it afterwards and catch up if you would like to. And then I should also say our next webinar is going to be the last webinar of the year, which is on the topic of ground gas, continuous ground gas monitoring. But we are currently planning the 2025 season, which is very exciting. And we'll be announcing that soon. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Simon to get started with today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Louis, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for dialing in to today's webinar. So just let me share my screen and we'll get underway. So over the next hour, I will be talking about mines, gas hazards and managing piling and drilling and grouting projects. And the content will cover an introduction to the mines gas hazard, looking at the coal mining legacy within the UK, some of the recent guidance documents on mines gas, very briefly touching on gas protection measures for mine gas, a look at a case study we've been involved in, and then finally a wrap up on the Gorebridge incident, 10 years on from when the housing estate was evacuated.
Just before you get started, we can't see your slides just yet. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Louis. Right. What have I done wrong here? Here we go. That's better.
Yes, perfect.
So, the content I've just gone through, and we're going to finish off with the Gorebridge incident. So, diving into the first topic, an introduction to mines gas. I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with this. I'm going to turn my camera off so that I'm not distracting to content, but I'll come back at the end. So the first topic is the extent of the mining legacy within the UK. And from Coal Authority data, 11% of the footprint of the UK is actually underlain by coalfields. And that means that about 7 million properties lie within the British coalfield area, and 130,000 properties are lying close within 20 metres of at least one mine entry. So a significant impact on existing development, let alone new development. And the hazards we're looking at are both chronic and acute. And in old terms, fire damp was one of the main risks. This is methane, but we also have black damp or stithe gas, which is carbon dioxide and nitrogen, which is another way of looking at it is an oxygen deficient atmosphere, which is equally dangerous. And then we have afterdamp, which is carbon monoxide. So the risks are the explosive risk from methane. As many of you will know, methane is explosive between 5 and 15%. Carbon dioxide is an asphyxiant, and it is fatal at concentrations above 8%. Carbon monoxide is a toxic gas, which is potentially fatal at concentrations just over 800 parts per million. And over the years, a number of people have been killed from mines gas. Within the mining industry, between 1851 and 1980, there had been recorded 186 coal mine explosions, causing 10,000 fatalities. But more recently, we've had evacuation of homes, explosions in homes, demolition and relocation of an entire village in Arkwright in Derbyshire. We've had a fatal asphyxiation in a stable in Widrington, another fatal asphyxiation of construction workers in a service trench in Barnsley. And in the 2000s, we've had explosions in a home in Workington. And again in Workington, a school was demolished and rebuilt. But more recently, we've had the hospitalisation of council tenants on the Gorebridge estate, and more of that at the end of the presentation. So those are the hazards and real effects associated with mines gas incidents. So let's look at the mining legacy in a little bit more detail. And going back to Roman or even pre-Roman times, coal was won by working the outcrop. But as time went by, other techniques of winning coal were developed, and the next step was sinking shafts down to shallow mine workings and working the coal out from what are called bell pits. And in places like Derbyshire, you can see the surface subsidence features associated with bell pit working. But as time went by, even more systematic ways of working coal were developed. And one of the terms, pillar and stall or room and pillar, was very widespread. It was only until we get into the 20th century that more mechanized techniques such as longwall mining became dominant. So one of the key turning points for the British coal mining industry was the Coal Mines Regulation Act of 1887. And this required operators to have their workings accurately surveyed and to lodge those plans with the authorities. So these abandonment plans are often very detailed surveys of the workings, but the difficulty we have in matching these underground surveys with present day surface features. But one thing which is common to both will be shaft locations, but these can be up to 10 meters out from current or accurate locations. So the Coal Authority is a legal body responsible for holding these abandonment plans, and they have approximately 360,000 of them. And on these plans, there are 172,000 recorded mine entries. But unfortunately, there's many, many more unrecorded entries which predate the 1887 legislation. Another feature is that these abandonment plans have been a great source of geological information because they record the location of faults and the dip and strike of a different strata. So pillar and stall workings are often represented on these plans, and this is a photograph of how they were actually worked by hand. And in plan, this is the sort of workings that would be developed: systematic roadways and cross-linking rooms or stalls linking those roadways. We can also see where they've been exposed in open cast mines, and very clear representation there in this photograph from the Tilnsley Park open cast site. So typically, pillar and stool workings will have a minimum of 30% coal extraction, but often, as a district was worked out, the operators would require pillars to be robbed in what's called retreat mining back towards the shaft. Clearly, taking coal out of the pillars reduces the safety of the roof, but as they moved back towards the shafts over time, extraction rates could reach up to 70% in some cases. So at the start of 1900s, longwall mining became possible. And this is a very clear image showing what was involved. You'd have a mechanical excavator, which is actually removing the full thickness of the coal across a panel of coal from one side to the other. And the roof above the conveyor belt and the excavator was protected by hydraulic rams and roof supports. And as the coal was extracted, these roof supports would be walked forwards across to fill the gap. And this allowed progressive subsidence behind the active working face. And this led to subsidence wave hitting the surface. And this was predicted. And in my early career, when longwall mining was still active in the early 1980s, one of my roles was to actually calculate what sort of surface substance was going to occur. But this is a more accurate photo of what was involved. It was extremely noisy, created a huge amount of dust, and was a very unpleasant working environment. This was a photo of the last deep coal mine, which was the Callingley Colliery in North Yorkshire, which closed in 2015. One point to make with regard to these mine workings, they required, to be safe, they required dewatering of the seam down to the depth of the worked seam. So when the operations finished, the pumps were turned off, and one of the effects was groundwater rebound. And typically this would take many years before it actually reached the natural water table. In some cases, perhaps 15 years. So here's a plan showing a longwall mining operation at the Maltby colliery near Rotherham. And the scale of this is quite remarkable. The plan is from east to west represents about 5 miles of operations. And at peak production, this mine was producing 1,500 tons of coal an hour. So all of these plans, available plans, are visible on the Coal Authority Interactive Map Viewer. And it shows a scalable map of the UK. And you can click on different features. Now, in the 1980s, I was a young engineering geologist working in the West Midlands, more specifically the Black Country. And this is an area that I was working in with Wolverhampton in the northwest and Birmingham to the southeast, and the towns in between, Dudley, Sedgley, Coseley, Bilston, Wednesbury. And this is from the Coal Authority interactive map, and I have shown you the mapping of the coal seam outcrops. Overlaying on top of that, I can show you the underground workings that are recorded and the probable workings that the Coal Authority believe are likely to have been worked. And then the last layer is the recorded mine shafts. and literally there's thousands of them across this small area. Some of those recordings will be multiple records of the same shaft in just slightly different positions on different maps, but literally there are thousands of recorded mine shafts here. So taking a step back and looking at pillar and stall workings in particular against the other ground gas hazards that we are having to deal with. Mines gases sit lower down on this table, but we're also concerned with, as an industry, landfill gas from modern licensed landfills. They have the protection from containment systems and gas extraction systems. We have naturally occurring deposits which can generate ground gases such as organic peats, but the over 20,000 former landfills which were unlined that date back from the 1960s, 70s and 80s. They are a significant hazard. But of all of them, pillar and stall workings have the potential, because of their open nature and extraction rates, have a potential of having the largest volume of hazardous gases of all of these different sources. So let's look at some of the guidance on mines gas, and I'll just make reference to these three documents. Syria 758, which was published in 2019, the Abandoned Mine Workings Manual. This is a comprehensive document running to 545 pages, so it takes quite a bit of time to get through. We have the Coal Authority guidance on managing the risk of hazardous gases when drilling and piling near coal. This was also published in 2019. And then more recently, we've had the CLARE guidance for good practice for risk assessment for coal mine gas emissions, published in October 2021. So going back to the Syria document, this covers both coal and non-coal workings and summarises former mining activity by county. So there's a separate chapter in this document talking about the specific mining operations within that particular area. But chapter 7 deals exclusively with mine gas and discusses its response to changes in atmospheric pressure. It also stresses the importance of a rate of change of atmospheric pressure in shallow mine workings, and that the rate of change is more important than the absolute pressure. It also gives guidance on how to investigate and stabilise abandoned mine workings through techniques such as drilling and grouting, and the importance of gas monitoring during these operations. A little bit more of that in a moment. The Coal Authority guidance includes a slightly different remit. It's a more readable document. It's a lot shorter, but it stresses the CDM regulations and the roles and responsibilities of the different actors working in this sector. It goes into the coal mine gases, properties and problems, and talks about gas monitoring. It talks about the hazards associated with the influence of drilling flush and injected materials, and then some practical measures and legislation, including the different permissions and permits that are required. It talks about the risk assessment and the source pathway receptor model, and things like the emissions at rigs and from boreholes, spontaneous combustion, and off-site risks. And gives a summary of other guidance documents, and then finishes off with a number of case studies. There's two elements that I want to particularly bring your attention to, and that is their identified risk from blowout from pressurized workings. If you remember, I mentioned that older workings that have had the pumps turned off, you get groundwater rebound. That groundwater rebound will rise up through open workings within a mine, and that rising water can pressurize sealed seams or sealed workings. And the hazard there is that if you're drilling into those workings, the trapped gas will be pressurized and you can get a blowout at that location. And that will be a blowout of potentially hazardous gases, methane rich or carbon dioxide rich, or indeed toxic gases such as carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide. And the second risk that is described in detail is a risk of forcing mine gases into neighbouring properties by drilling or drilling and grouting operations. And in these circumstances, it stresses the importance of carrying out monitoring of those nearby properties, at-risk properties. The CLARE document provides a good practice guide and describes the mining techniques in a summary form, but stresses the importance of the mine's gas hazards and the investigation and risk assessment process, and provides good case studies at the end. It's interesting to note that the authors identified a number of significant problems that have been present in our sector. The lack of critical thinking, the lack of understanding of specific factors, the lack of schematic conceptual site models through sites, and the over-reliance on spot ground gas monitoring. Also, they make reference to little or no consideration of the uncertainties. And finally, they talk about the key pathways such as boreholes not being located or sealed. Well, that is something which I'm going to be stressing in some detail over the next short while. So the CLARE document also has some excellent graphics, which talks about the source pathways and migration drivers in the document. So let's move on to just a very brief touch on how do we protect properties, new development from mines gas. And really it's the same as we have had for other gases. But you may ask the question, if there have been so many homes located in former mining areas, why haven't there been more problems? Well, one comment to make is that a lot of those properties are older homes, perhaps built Victorian terraces or 1930s vintage homes. And these were often built on shallow strip footings with elevated suspended ground floors and a fully ventilated subfloor void. They were also poorly insulated and drafty. So if there were any mines gases entering the property, then they were probably very easily dissipated. Those points are not necessarily true for modern properties. But the truth is that actually over the last 30 years, there's been 60 recorded mine gas incidents within the UK. So you could argue that actually these are not such uncommon problems. And modern houses, they may be better insulated and they may not be drafty, but as a consequence, if mines gases are getting into them, then those mines gases are being trapped and are potentially more hazardous as a consequence. So how do we protect these modern houses? Well, it's a twofold approach, trying to introduce a dilute and disperse preferential pathway to atmosphere. South of the border, typically new homes are built with suspended beam and block floor. North of the border, there may be a raft foundation built on a permeable gas distribution layer, granular layer, for instance. So, relatively straightforward and easy in theory, but it's the application of these and the detailing that is important to get right. So let me just talk about a case study in South Lancashire that a local authority asked our advice on. And this was a very straightforward, small development in a former mining area, which was known to have shallow abandoned mine workings. And this is a conceptual site model that I've prepared for it. The site had over 5 meters of boulder clay, and there was known workings at between 13 and 15 meters depth beneath the site. So a clear source pathway receptor model identified mines gas as a hazard. Also, mines gas in the backfill in a nearby open cast area. Excuse me. And then we have perhaps mines gas present in the permeable sandstone layer. Pathways potentially through drift deposits in the boulder clay, such as sand or gravel layers, and then receptors for proposed houses. So very clear potential source pathway receptor model, and the developer employed a contractor to investigate it because there was a credible pollutant linkage, all very good. So a number of shallow monitoring wells were drilled or boreholes into the clay to investigate the presence of permeable strata. Whoops. Sorry. And the monitoring in those monitoring wells found no gas. The boreholes identified no sand or gravel layers. So the recommendation that no gas protection was necessary. But the structural engineers came in and said, well, there's shallow mine workings and we need to investigate those. So they sank a rotary borehole and they discovered open voids and lost flush between 13 and 15 meters. And that matched the recorded abandoned mines workings. So they made the decision to drill and grout. And that resulted in that initial open hole borehole representing a introduced preferential pathway. But if it was outside the footprint of the houses, that shouldn't have been a problem. But the grout holes were under the footprint of a building, and each one of them represents a potential pathway. For standard NHB house footprint, 8 meters by 8 meters, that's likely going to result in 9 grout holes, 9 preferential pathways beneath each of the homes. And is this realistic? Is this a realistic hazard that has just been created where one wasn't there previously? Well, this is a different site entirely. We were not involved with the drilling and grouting operations, but we were visiting the site afterwards to advise on gas protection measures. And this is what we saw. The plan on the right shows the layout of the drilling and grouting, with the arrow showing the direction of the photograph. And you can see that grouting has been completed and the drilling and grouting contractor has moved off-site. But the grout holes were not topped up, and they were open to depth, possibly open to depth to the mine workings. So this is what should happen in a grouting operation. Boreholes are open holes are drilled into a worked coal seam. Tremmy pipes are installed, and grout is pumped through those pipes into the mine workings. And when the workings are full, grout will back up those boreholes, and the grouting crew will move on to the next borehole. But over minutes or hours, the grout can slump. And if the grout hole has intersected a roadway, the grout could actually run away down that roadway off-site, down gradient off-site. So often you'll find that the grout has dropped away and the hole has remained open. So those open holes should have been topped up. The next day, the grouting crew should have gone round and filled up all of these holes. But in this case, they hadn't. Also, it's important to note that payment is made on measured quantities. So would a client rely on the contractor to tell him or her what quantities were used? Well, to ensure that the drilling and grouting contractor is held to account, they should be supervised, and a consultant should be appointed to supervise these operations and measure the quantities used. A contractor may be very tempted to overestimate the quantities he's used, and actually will be keen not to use too much drilling and grouting grout. So what happened here? Well, you could argue that it was not properly supervised. Construction quality assurance was not maintained. So going back to this situation, if these grout holes remain open, then they do represent a real risk. And if the mine workings haven't been fully sealed, then there could be a residual volume of mines gas as a reservoir that could be at risk of flowing into the houses. So we also have other geotechnical issues associated with these former mining areas. I made reference to a long-time settlement from longwall mining. You also have long-term settlement from open cast backfill, potential risk of crown hole collapse over the intersections in pillar and store workings. You have shaft collapse of recorded shafts, or even a shaft collapse of unrecorded shafts, which no one knew were present. But we also have engineering solutions, reprofiling of sites and recompacting, dynamic compaction, or vibropiles. Mentioned drilling and grouting, but we also use piled foundation and raft foundations in these areas. The point I'd like to make is it's really important that some form of CQA is introduced. And if the site is changed, then is there someone made responsible for reassessing a mines gas risk? So this leads us on to the Gore Bridge incident. It's now 10 years since the estate was evacuated, and the NHS Trust were carrying out their investigations into what happened on site. But just as a brief recap, this was a social housing estate built by Midlothian Council in 2009. In 2013, a number of council tenants were overcome by gas and taken to accident and emergency, and the affected homes were evacuated. What actually happened? There was a some teenagers were having a sleepover in one of the houses. They were in sleeping bags in the living room. When the parents came down in the morning, on a Saturday morning, they couldn't wake the teenagers up, and they were rushed to hospital. Luckily, they survived. But over a subsequent few months, a total of 22 people had either attended accident and emergency or sought medical advice from their GP. Long and short of it, after the investigations, it was found that it was mines gas that was the problem. And Midlothian Council took the very hard decision that the best way of resolving the problem and reassuring future tenants of the site that the whole housing estate be demolished and rebuilt, 64 homes in total. So I'm going to make reference to information which is in the public domain, primarily from the NHS Trust's Incident Management Team final report published in November 2017. I should make the point that the IMT remit was derived from the Scottish Government's guidance on managing public health incidents, and the remit was to minimise the number of cases of illness, minimise mortality, inform patients and the public of health risks, and collect information for use in better understanding of a problem. It was not to consider who, if anyone, was culpable. So just to give you a sense of the site, this was Gorebridge, an area of former housing which had been cleared for redevelopment in the middle of the town, and this was the new estate that was built, and this is an aerial photograph from 2012. In terms of position and topography, this is a Google Earth satellite photo of the site with a cross-section sign through, and you can see that the site was near the crest of the hill, and the groundwater level, as controlled by nearby streams, was probably 25 to 30 meters below ground level. So from that, any shallow mine workings would have been open voids. Here's information from the Coal Authority Interactive Viewer. The shallowest worked coal seam was the Great Seam, which is recorded as being between 1.8 and 2.3 meters thick. There's the site. Here's recorded outcrop of the coal seams, recorded shafts. That's the area of probable mine workings. So from the IMT report, we have a chronology that includes an initial consultant A, doing a phase 1 desk study, and they identified mines gas as a potential hazard. Consultant B was appointed, and they instructed contractor C to carry out a phase 2 site investigation. Later that year, in 2006, the supplementary phase 2 site investigation was carried out. 2007, consultant D was appointed, and contractor E was appointed to carry out drilling and grouting. And finally, consultant F was appointed to oversee the main contractor G to construct the homes. And then a few years later, the first health issues came to light. Altogether, including Midlothian Council, 8 different organisations were involved in the design and construction of this scheme. So just focusing in on this element, the consultant B instructing contractor C to carry out the phase 2 investigation confirmed the presence of shallow mine workings beneath the site and the possible presence of mines gas that would be present. The supplementary site investigation located a mine shaft within the main site area, installed monitoring wells, and during periods of high atmospheric pressure, recorded low concentrations of carbon dioxide and an oxygen deficiency. Their recommendation was that the site represented a CS1 and no gas protection measures were required. At that point, mines gas was removed from the revised risk register, and therefore no gas protections were included in the design. My point would be that someone should have spotted that there was a mismatch between what was found in those shallow monitoring wells and the actual risk from the known shallow mine workings. So this is Gorebridge again, and these are the houses where the teenagers were overcome by mines gas, number 87 New Byers Crescent. Just as an aside, just to give you a feel for the physiological impact of carbon dioxide, you start noticing elevated carbon dioxide with headaches at 2%, disorientation at 5%. You will collapse at concentrations above 8%. And at 20% carbon dioxide, it's a fatal concentration and you'll die within a few seconds. As part of the IMT investigations, they recruited the Coal Authority, officers from Midlothian Council, and they appointed consultants to investigate the site. The Coal Authority investigations included monitoring the affected properties, and they found that the downstairs toilet had 8% carbon dioxide. The lounge, where the teenagers had been sleeping, had 12% carbon dioxide. Beneath the kitchen floor, they found 19% carbon dioxide and 21% within the ground immediately beneath the raft. 23% within the property's cavity walls. They went into the back garden and drilled a well to the shallowest coal seam, which was found at 13 meters depth. They found 25% carbon dioxide in that seam with an oxygen deficiency of 4.6% oxygen. The balance gas, of course, is nitrogen, and nitrogen in itself is an asphyxiant. Importantly, they found no grout in that coal seam. They also took samples for radiocarbon dating, and that identified it as within the house was of geological origin. In other words, it had the same fingerprint as the mines gas found in the coal seam. They carried out continuous gas monitoring within the understairs cupboard in number 87. And this graph is a little bit complicated, but the blue line is the rising, falling atmospheric pressure. The red line is the carbon dioxide concentrations at this location. And every time the atmospheric pressure dropped, carbon dioxide concentrations were spiking up to almost 25%. After this, the Coal Authority installed alarms in the 56 of the properties on the estate. And this is the record of the alarms going off. You've got the atmospheric pressure recorded on the top graph and the record of the alarms being sounded on the bottom graph. The line on the bottom graph represents a number of occupants in those houses. And over a period from April 2014 to October 2014, gradually householders were being decanted and evacuated from the estate before the whole estate was finally evacuated. And you can see that periods of atmospheric pressure falls correspond with increased levels of the alarms going off. Also, the NHS tracked evidence from another source. They found that 84% almost of the households that were fitted with alarms had pets, dogs and cats primarily. And residents reported that, well, 11% of the residents reported that their pets were ill during periods when the alarms were activated. So let's move to the grouting, drilling and grouting operations. And again, this is information which is present within the IMT report and the location of 87 New Byres Crescent. So repositioning this into this format, we can see the plan of the buildings, the number of vibrostone columns beneath the raft foundations, the location of the cable percussive boreholes and the rotary boreholes for coal seams. The blue is a surface water attenuation tank some distance away from number 87. And the stars represent the grout holes. And the grout takes varied from less than 1 ton right through to greater than 10 tons of grout recorded in those orange grout holes. And then each house was pressure tested with a single borehole. Now, I spent 4 years of my early career as an engineering geologist in the West Midlands, supervising drilling and grouting operations to a large extent. That formed a major part of my work. And what we see here is generally recognised as good practice in Scotland, but south of the border, it's typical that where you've got high grout takes, certainly greater than 10 tons, that the drilling grid is closed up and supplementary grout holes are installed to ensure that all of the voids are fully sealed. That's not for practice in Scotland. But they were pressure test boreholes. The question I would ask is, what does a pressure test borehole tell you if it's drilled into one of the coal pillars? Anyway, the IMT report conclusions confirmed that the worked coal seam was the source of the carbon dioxide. They suspect that the workings were not fully grouted because the borehole they drilled into the back garden didn't find any grout. They suspect that the grout holes beneath the houses were possibly not sealed and that the site investigation boreholes beneath the houses may not have been sealed. They also note that vibrostone columns were used under the rafts and no gas protection measures were installed. And service entries through the raft was not sealed either. Finally, they conclude that the highest carbon dioxide concentrations within the houses were associated with falling atmospheric pressure. So let's just look at the atmospheric pressure which actually happened during that period in September 2013. This is the date, the Saturday morning that on the 7th of September when the teenagers were hospitalised. And in the preceding 48 hours, the atmospheric pressure had dropped by 18 millibars. But as you can see on later, a few days later, pressure falls of between 25 and 35 millibars were not unusual. So let's take a theoretical look at the effect of open mine workings which may have been grouted. And this is theoretical. Take a plan of pillar and stall workings and place a new build over it. let's assume that the worked coal seam thickness was 2.3 meters, the depth to the pillar and stall workings was 13 meters, the extraction rate was 30%, and the width of the house 8 meters. Let's assume we have an area of influence that is 3 times that house width, i.e. 24 meters. That would give us a residual void space in the mine workings of 312 cubic meters. If we assume that 90% of the area beneath the housing was grouted and 50% beyond the limit of the housing was grouted from runoff from the grouting, that would reduce the residual void space to 71 cubic meters. Now that's what it looks like in cross section, and there's that 90% grouting beneath the houses. If we look at an atmospheric pressure drop of 18 millibars, and looking at Boyle's law, we work out the drop in pressure and the effect on the volume, we could see that in that circumstance, we would get 1.3 cubic meters of gas entering a house up a open grout hole. However, if we look at this circumstance with a 35 millibar pressure drop, then that would result in 2.5 cubic meters of oxygen deficient, carbon dioxide rich gases, mines gases getting into the house. Is 2.5 cubic meters a lot? Is that a hazard to be worried about? Well, let's look at it in a slightly different way. Let's assume that instead of what we've just looked at, where we have an area of influence, let's assume that all of the mine workings are interconnected, and we are looking at a mined area of 40 meters by 80 meters. Well, that would have a residual void space of 2,208 cubic meters of mines gas. If we assume that 90% was grouted beneath a housing development and 0% beyond the limit of a housing, remember the Coal Authority found no grout when they drilled a hole in the back garden, that would give a residual void of 815 cubic meters. If the atmospheric pressure drop of 35 millibars took place, then the ingress volume into that house could potentially be 29 cubic meters. And that certainly is a volume to be worried about. So going back to, in the last few minutes of the presentation, I'll go back to the Coal Authority guidance documents and the need for health and safety monitoring. If you are facing this potential risk of blowout, then it's important that the drilling and piling operations, the drillers wear personal gas alarms, that there are static alarms on the drilling rigs, and that there are spot monitoring of the open holes periodically across the operations. With regard to the risk of nearby properties and the effect or potential risk of displacing mines gases into those properties by introducing flush or grouting materials, then it's, in addition to those previous protections, it's important that those sensitive receptors are continuously monitored. So this is what we have done on a number of projects. This is a new heat and power station project where we were carrying out the health and safety monitoring of the drilling operations and piling operations, where the potential risk was to the construction workers from displaced mines gases. We've also been involved in doing continuous monitoring of sensitive receptors, as well as looking at health and safety monitoring of drilling and grouting operations. This is a new station being built in a former mining area. But if everything has gone according to plan and gas protection measures have been installed into a new development, then things still can go wrong. My final case study is of a new build warehouse in a former mining area. And the development included gas protection membranes over the full footprint of a building, which were third-party verified. But the potential tenant was very risk averse. They were going to be using automated loading and robot machinery inside the space, and they wanted added additional evidence that the building was safe. So we were employed to carry out high resolution and internal sweep survey of the building. Unfortunately, we discovered percentage scale concentrations of methane entering the building, and particularly around the stanchions. We found concentrations at ground level of 5% methane in this building. So despite site investigation, identifying it as a risk, and gas protection measures being required in the building, which were third-party verified, that gas management system failed in this case. The client did not rent this building. And there are legal cases being considered regarding the developer and the other parties involved with gas protection. So, in summary, open voids in abandoned mine workings are probably the greatest gas risk that we face in the UK. Potentially large volumes of hazardous gas represent a significant source. Preferential gas migration pathways include the existing shafts, adits, and natural features such as faults. But we also have pressure-driven migration along pathways which can move large volumes of gas. And the additional factors to think about are the site investigation boreholes, drilling and grouting, improvement works, foundation designs themselves, should vibro piles be used, atmospheric pressure and rising groundwater, but also if everything else is done correctly, if gas protection is required, then we should have high quality installation and verification. I view that as being essential. Okay, just a final slide. We've got another webinar coming up on the 20th of November, continuous ground gas monitoring, trust, telemetry, and calibration. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was very interesting. I just wanted to get started with some questions, if that's okay. Everyone who's watching today, you're more than welcome to ask a question in the Q&A box down at the bottom, and we'll get to those questions. But just to get started, whilst people ask those questions, I just had a couple for you, Simon. I just wanted to ask if Gorebridge is a one-off or has something similar happened elsewhere?
GGS has been involved in a number of similar events. These don't get into the public domain, they're not reported, and we have a duty of care to our client not to make the information public. But we've had very similar events in different parts of the country. One site comes to mind where we were on a new housing estate in the northeast, and exactly the same thing happened where we had mines gas coming up through unsealed grout holes. There, the residents were rehoused by the developer before it hit the headlines, and the house had gas protection systems retrofitted to it.
Okay, interesting. And then my second question before we move on to taking questions. I just wanted to ask, what do you think went wrong with the warehouse gas protection?
My, my, I have sympathy for construction companies with developers,
Mhm.
but the profit margins that they're having to deal with are very low. And we saw the collapse of the ISG contractor, the fifth largest in the UK, just beginning of last month. Their profit margins were reported to be between 1% and 2% on a project.
Mhm.
If material costs go up, if labour costs go up, then it's really difficult for those contracts to be um, um, completed to a high standard.
Mhm.
And cost cutting measures, quantity surveyors inevitably look for the lowest cost for service providers, for subcontractors. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, lowest cost doesn't necessarily mean that you get a good service.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Um, so to get started on audience questions, somebody asked if it's advisable to complete post-drill and uh, ground gas monitoring to establish any changes.
That is a technique. I suggest that CQA should, at the first stage, check that all the grout holes are sealed and signed off. If they're not sealed, then they should be sealed. I mean, it's very
Mhm.
simple to just pour a bucket of grout down a borehole until it tops out. It's not rocket science. Um, on sensitive sites, then a period of perhaps surface emission monitoring might be a sensible belt and braces approach. Yes.
Mhm. Okay, thank you so much. And then we have a question. Someone's asking, what's more risky, deep coal mining or shallow coal mining in terms of ground gas hazards?
Um, Typically, it will be the shallow mine workings because the fractured ground associated with them in itself will form pathways for migrating gases. A lot of the deeper mines will now be flooded, and the gas hazard will have effectively been removed,
Hmm.
um, unless that circumstance where um, the rising mine watering rebound has pressurized pockets of gas,
Hmm.
and they may still be present. The thing is that deep mining is not usually a problem to surface development. You're not likely to be entering those deeper workings by
Hmm.
either doing site investigation or foundation piling.
Hmm.
So it's the shallow ones which are the main problem.
Okay. And then we have a question. If groundwater fluctuates within our site, but not fully flooding the seam, can we use this together for pressure changes to knock down the volume of gas?
You will find that there will be in shallow workings some fluctuation in the water table, particularly if there is a if it's reached the natural water table. Um, that fluctuation will affect the any voids which are present above it. Um, how you manage or interpret that will be down to the site specifics. So
Hmm.
I'm struggling to find a general statement to make on that.
Okay, no worries at all. Um, and then another question. Do you experience mine gas issues relating to non-coal mining activity? It's an interesting one.
There are mines gas issues associated with other mineral mining, but uh, typically not to the same extent. Coal is different insofar as it is directly associated with potentially high concentrations of methane, which are absorbed onto the coal particles, and open coal faces or residual coal within an open void can oxidize and give rise to high concentrations of carbon dioxide. And as coal oxidizes, the oxygen which is present will be depleted, and you'll get that nitrogen carbon dioxide styrth gas situation arising. It all depends how well ventilated a mine is. But typically, coal mining is a significantly greater risk than other mining operations.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you. I will just have time for a couple more. Someone has asked if the completion of drilling grout would reduce the gas risk, so gas protection may not be required at all.
If the grouting is effective and shown to be effective, I would still recommend that gas protection measures are put in, because it's difficult to guarantee 100% sealing of all voids.
Okay, good to know. And then we'll do one more question. Peter asks what the significance of hydrogen sulfides is.
Well, hydrogen sulfide is a toxic gas which can be provide an acute risk at relatively low concentrations, in parts per million scale. And hydrogen sulfide is commonly associated with coal seams. You get pyrites, co-disposed, co-developed within coal deposits, and as that is attacked by acidic groundwaters, you get hydrogen sulfide given off, and that can be part of a mine to gas cocktail.
Thank you for your very thorough answers. I think that's a good place to stop. But of course, if there is more, there's a couple more observations and questions. If anyone would like to reach out or send those along to us, more than welcome to. And yeah, thank you so much, Simon. Do you have
Thank
any
you.
words to say?
Thank you very much for everyone who's listened. I look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. In the meantime, all the best. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.